Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris McDonough, and I'm the COO over at Amplified Solutions. And I am joined today with the one and only Andrew Altman, who's also a COO, but over at Open to Close. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you?
Great, great. We are going to be having a great conversation today about strategies for teams to create a killer closing process. So, my background before I came to Amplified Solutions is in real estate. And I was a broker in charge of a team. We grew to about 225. We were an independent brokerage, and we had a fantastic operation. We had many different departments, the closing department included. So I'm going to be speaking to that experience today. But Andrew, I'd love for you to kick us off by telling us a little bit about Open to Close and how you came to be at Open to Close. What's your
Sure.
history?
Yeah, so I've been in the general industry for about 20 years. I started off in actual civil engineering and survey, and we did a lot of work for Motorola, Nokia, big companies that were doing development type stuff. And at that time, I realized I was in the wrong business because those guys were getting bigger checks than I was at the time. So um, I got my real estate license. Me and my wife had always invested in real estate, and so it was a pretty easy transition into that. Once people know, you start getting family and friends, and it just kind of built and built and built. We became really good at short sales and probates and divorces and stuff that was kind of nichey, and that kind of gave us our start. So what we found was there was no good software out there for the closing process and the listing process, and so it was out of necessity that it was built. Originally, it was built on Salesforce on my end, and my co-founder at the same time, we were kind of having a parallel build off. He was building TC Workflow, and I was building Salesforce with an overlay. And so when I figured out that Salesforce was breaking all the time on me, and I had to keep coming back to the office in between listings and whatnot, I called him and we teamed up and we ended up making Open to Close.
Wow, that's awesome. So can you describe this isn't a sales pitch for Open to Close by any means, but can you describe in general, your elevator pitch before we get into the actual strategies
Yeah,
of what is Open to Close?
sure. Basically, we just automate 80 to 90% of the listing to close or transaction to close process. That's the key. Is it's a fully customizable system, and
Mhm.
it's also very automated. And so those are the two things that we kind of focus on. And then the third thing is best in class integrations. And so not having those integrations is just a killer to your business because then you're going to multiple places. And so having the automation, having the customization, and having those integrations, I think those are the three keys to any successful software in this space.
Right. I would definitely agree. So why, in your opinion, is having a closing process important, regardless of if you have 500 agents or you have five agents? Why is having a closing process so important?
Yeah, I think for me, it's all about systems, right? If you don't have a system, what do you have? Nothing, right? You're just kind of flying blind and letting people do whatever they want to do. And without that system in place, it's really hard to come up with that consistent, repeatable process that's going to give you a good agent and client experience. So it doesn't matter if you're a single agent or whether you have 800 agents on your team, having that client experience be second to none is really important to getting that repeat and referral business.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And to have, you said it perfectly, that repeatable process, because if you're looking to grow and scale your business, you need that experience to be smooth, not only for your agents, because your agents, if you're in real estate and you're a business owner or a broker, the agents are also technically your clients. You can't
Right.
have closings without the agents. So ensuring that everyone involved has that smooth experience is crucial to growing your business and getting it.
For sure.
So if you're looking to streamline your current process, if
Yep.
you think, okay, well, we know how to do closings, but how can I improve it? What are some things that you would advise us to look for as you are going through your process and maybe overhauling it to make it better?
Sure. So I'm going to tell you some higher level things that I look at, but I'm also going to kind of back that down to like a single agent or a small team too, just so they know where they can start, because it's not always with an open to close type software, right? It may be just Google Sheets at first.
Right.
It's just a matter of getting that, like we talked about, that repeatable process. That's the most important part of this. It doesn't have to be this crazy expensive or crazy involved setup. It could be as simple as having a SOP for how you do emails, an SOP for how you put things in a Google Sheet, and maybe your compliance software. So it can be really easy. But the things that I like to ask are, you know, when you get into when you're creating a system for maybe a medium-sized team, do I have customizable fields? If you don't have custom fields, like go back to the drawing board, right? If you don't have customizable fields, like you're starting at a huge deficit to what you could be starting with. You never know what states you're going to go into. You never know what type of transactions. Like I was saying, we got into niche stuff. So divorces need different fields than probate needs, that short sales, especially short sales, need. And so with the flexibility of custom fields, now you have the flexibility to do whatever you need to do. And so I ask myself, do I have custom fields? Do I have, for basic, do I have a task list, right? But we don't want a glorified task list like everything else in the world, just like a Google task or something. We want tasks that are able to update dates. So if I change the closing date, I want that to cascade through all my dates and change all of them, and then update all my tasks that do with that, and update all my calendar invites that have to do with that. I want to be able to press one button and have, 20 or 30 things happening in the background, so I don't have to remember to do that myself.
Right. And that's really, there's so many moving parts to the real estate transaction, so many different people that you have to strike that balance, I think, of automation while keeping it personal, because we're all, I think, smart enough to know, okay, this is a form email, and to sort of sub point on that, at what point are your clients going to be comfortable with something they know is a generic email? Like, which pieces that you automate need to be personalized, and which pieces are that would be acceptable to be, hey, thanks for getting to this part of the transactions. Here's what you need to know about title insurance. So if you sent me an email that was like, hey, Chris, we've reached X point in the closing process. Here's what you need to know about title insurance. I know that nobody sat and wrote that email out to me, and that would be acceptable. I'm not upset or offended that that was done, but at different points in the process, those types of situations, you would want it to feel like it was very personal in that process, and that they were very involved, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a delicate touch here, right? We're automating to get rid of those double typing and the repeatable tasks that you have to do. We're automating those out so that you can spend more time giving that 5-star service, more touches, more calls, more things that are going to get those referrals and repeat business back to you. Now, we do have some things, and not that we're here to talk about open and close, but just pointing out some features that are really important. What we do is when you fill out like the initial intake forms or however you process that transaction, it automatically generates based on your answers. So if there's an HOA, it knows to add the HOA fields, the HOA tasks, the HOA documents for compliance, the HOA trigger menu, all this stuff automatically comes in. So when you get in there, your transaction is correct. Why I mention this is because there's a layer of emails on there, right? That you want to send out, your initial emails going out to people. Well, we use something called smart blocks, and basically smart blocks are conditional statements. Instead of highlighting the email, everyone out there that's done a transaction knows they got all those emails with the highlights, and they're like, take this out if this happens, or put this in if this happens.
Yeah.
Open Close does that automatically. So what we thought was, hey, I don't want to do that every single time. So what we say is, if this field is X, or if this document exists, or if this field is X and this document exists, put in this paragraph into this email. So it'll actually build your email to look very custom. So they have no clue that it's automated, but it's giving them useful information at the same time. That's the key, is right information, right time, right person, right? If you can hit those 3 things, it doesn't matter if it's automated, because that's what they're looking for.
Right. And that education piece, I feel like, is something I would look for in your review of your closing process. Is, am I educating the client on why they need to be doing this, why this is important? Because we're at the finish line. They are so exhausted from their lender asking them for the same bit of information 20 times. And emotions are, real estate's typically, unless you're an investor, it's typically an emotional thing. And it's not always a good emotion. You're getting divorced, your kids have moved out, and you're having to downsize. There's been a death in the family, and you were emotionally, it was my mom's house or whatever. So because emotions are running high, having that education piece in the outreach that you're using with your clients is going to help smooth that. If you say, hey, I need you to send me these 20 things, and we're like, fine, I don't really want to do that. But if I understand why it's necessary, why they need it, why they're asking for the 5th time, I'm going to be less reluctant to do the work necessary to help everyone get to the finish line. So
Yeah,
that's something I would look for as you're reviewing. Am I educating the consumer on what we're doing and why it's important?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing agents go through, right? It is the two things that are very important to our team is trust, establishing that trust with the client, right? If they don't trust you, you might as well refer them out, right? If you lost the trust, then there's no reason to work with them. So establishing that trust, but it's very important for a TC to establish that trust too, because you're asking for a lot of personal information. You're asking for a lot of information on certain timelines. They have to trust that they know that you're not going to ask again. And that's why these systems are so important. The other thing is not only the trust, but like basically the follow through, right? Are you communicating in the right method? Are you being cognizant of what type of person they are? Are they a high D personality or are they a C? Like you can communicate things differently to those people so that use the automation to take all the time out of the transaction. So now you can have these conversations with the client and actually get stuff done, right?
Right.
Phone calls go a long way. And I know a lot of people are resistant to them because they do take time, but that's what the automation's for. Let's OCR scan your documents and put all that information into fields automatically. Let's have everything update automatically throughout your system with one click so that you do have the time to provide that 5-star level service.
Right. And that comes with the relationship, and I want to talk about that relationship a little bit. So when we're working through our closing process, determining what does the agent do, what does the closing coordinator do, would you advise? I used to run this with a checklist. So it went out to the closing coordinator and the agent. So the agent didn't have to ask the well, what is this being done? Like, how do you manage that relationship internally from this is what our closing coordinator does, this is what our agents are expected to do?
Yeah, I think that the same thing goes with your agents, right? As a TC, you have to establish that trust with your agents that things are going to get done, things are going to get communicated, things are going to get followed up without them having to worry about it. For me, as an agent, right? I started as an agent. I'm thinking about 100 different things. My ADD mind is going crazy, right? I love having a transaction coordinator that's going to take care of this stuff for me. So there's very few agents out there that I think have control issues. A lot of them are on the other spectrum where they're just so all over the place that you don't even want them involved in the transaction. I don't want me involved in the transaction, and I don't want my agents involved in the transaction as much as possible, right? They still have to communicate with the clients. There's still tasks that they're responsible for. Ultimately, it's their license that they have to worry about on this. But if you have a really good TC and you've established that trust and you know that the system's not going to break down because you build it the right way, now the agent can start trusting. And any TC out that's listening to this, they know it's a much better experience when they can just handle 90% of the things and not have the agent involved. I think everyone's in agreement there.
Right. I think so too. And that the piece you were talking about with the trust between the agent, I want to talk about that. Is this more for new TCs? Michelle, we're talking about strategies for team leaders to set up a closing coordinating system that's going to work. So overall strategies for closing coordination for any size team that's going to help you with your team. So we can send you the recording if you have other things to do. So with that, who's responsible for communicating with your clients? Something you mentioned earlier about the agent was the license is on the line. we need to make sure that both the closing coordinator and the agent understand that it is ultimately the agent's responsibility. Just because you have someone assisting you with your process, you're still the licensee. That responsibility remains with you. So you would want to make sure that even though someone else is communicating on your behalf, the agent knows enough about the transaction so that they're still involved, they're still knowing what's going on, and they're still honoring the license that they're signed to.
Yeah. I think too, a lot of this can go back to, some of the integration talk that we talked about before. When the TC is completing tasks, right, we can automatically sync those, and a lot of companies can, right? It's not just us, but a lot of companies can sync those to Follow Up Boss or other CRMs out there. I'm just going to use Follow Up Boss because we have a super deep integration with them, and they provide a really great API for us to do it on. When the TC is filling out when they're switching fields, it's updating in Follow Up Boss. When they, you can pull in contacts, you can update fields, you can put deals in there without having to go over to Follow Up Boss to do it. But the agent is getting the full information of what's happening in real time, because we want to keep our agents in Follow Up Boss as much as possible, right? Because you don't want to send them to all these different systems. You want them in one system so they can concentrate, they actually utilize it, they actually adopt it, and they actually use it well. So the key is having these integrations with SkySlope, Dotloop, Brokerment, DocuSign, Stripe, all these things. We want to do it in open to close and push that information out to other systems so that you don't need to go there necessarily, but everybody on the team has visibility into those things.
And that's important for not only the agent experience, but the client experience as well. You don't like hearing from your agent, oh, well, I need to talk to so-and-so about that. Let me get back to you. Let me get back to you. Let me get back to you. If all that information is flowing into one place, like a Follow-Up Boss, that cuts down not only on the distrust that comes from your client, where you're like, man, my agent just doesn't know the answer to any of these questions. Who are they talking to? They are supplied with that information immediately. So it helps that inherent trust in your agent, but it also cuts down on the work that comes in having to communicate outside of that platform, whatever it be, to calling your transaction coordinator, emailing them, waiting on them to respond. And that efficiency is going to help the agent get the information to their client, but also drum up new transactions. Because if you're spending so much time going back and forth, that's cutting into your prospecting time, really.
The visibility is key, right? You want to be able to see each other's emails and each other's text messages and messaging. And so having a system that keeps that messaging within the transaction, it's also great for auditing, right? If you're in a state like California and you need that audit anyway, you might as well keep all that communication running through the transaction instead of having it, personal cell phones and God knows where else all this communication's happening. You get the recorded calls, you get the transcripts, you get, texts, you get emails, you get all that stuff in one place. And that's the key to everything.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And Lee made a great point in the chat. It's also super important for compliance. So if you were to get audited or someone has questions about the transactions, you've got all that information right there. This is when they talk to them, this is their response, and that's really good. Would you advise for the agent to stop communicating about the transaction, or have a mix of communications from the closing coordinator and the agent? So, sort of establishing the lines of, you're responsible for talking to them about this, I'm responsible for talking to them about that. Would you set up rules there, or would you just let them work it out?
Yeah, I think having a system for everything, right? Communication system, data system, whatever system it is, I think you need some kind of guidelines. Now, that's not to say there can't be some gray areas as long as you're communicating. But I think sitting down and having that expectations meeting, we always used to have an expectations meeting with clients, right? This is what you can expect from us. This is our commitment to you. This is how much we're going to communicate. This is how fast we're going to get things done, blah, 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 right? I always set those expectations. You need to do the same with your agents. You need to come up with a plan as a team leader of, do I want my agents doing this? Or is there time better spent prospecting, right? Or do I need this because this is more of a license type activity and I want the agent to be totally responsible for this? But I think the key to all that is just having the system so that everybody's on the same page, and whatever the agent's using to communicate is being conveyed to the TC, and whatever the TC is using to communicate is also being conveyed to that agent, so everybody has visibility. I think the key is just that visibility into it and making sure that things get done, and also having reminders if something doesn't get done, to have those like, hey, if this document isn't submitted by 4 days before closing, I want a reminder to pop up to say, hey, we still don't have this, or a text message to go to the agent, hey, I still need this document. So there's things you can put in place in your systems or your softwares to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks, because something's going to slip through the cracks, right? There's a lot going into this transaction. There's always something, even if it's a day late, something's going to happen where you're going to need those safeguards built in your system.
Yeah, I really like that. And also with those missing items, knowing the buck stops with the agent. That was something that we always really discussed with them, was because the blame game does start. You have to cultivate a culture of teamwork with your operations. The operations staff is what makes a organization grow and scale. It's what the it factor in helping and growing and scaling. But at the same time, it is most often the least valued positions within the company. And so fostering that respect for them, you're on the same, if you're looking at an org chart, the agent and the TC are on the same level, but ultimately the agent is solely responsible for getting those documents, because they're the licensee. Their license is on the line. And I think it's just really, really important to make sure that you don't accidentally cultivate an us versus them environment. So if you hear language from your agents that's like, well, they do X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, it's same team. And why digging into those scenarios and helping the agent see their role in whatever happened is really important, because it's very easy, because typically if you have your operations staff at a different location, or your everyone works, a lot of people, I'm at home, you're at home, like everyone works from home now. So you're not rubbing elbows with these people on a day-to-day basis. They're typically in two different locations. And it's easy to develop that gap between the two, because no one wants to be responsible. But if the agent realizes that, okay, they're here to help, this mistake happened and whatever. And also watching the language with the client. I would never let it slide if my agent was throwing my closing coordinator under the bus for missing a document or whatever. So I don't want this ever to take a negative turn, but that is something that as a leader in real estate, you need to manage, and you need to actively manage that. The way you talk about your operations is going to be the way your agents see the operations. They're going to see it through your eyes. So you have to practice what you preach. And if you say, we couldn't do this without our operations, then you need to treat them accordingly. You need to pay them well. You need to position them well. You need to celebrate them as well as your agents.
Yeah, you had some great points there. I wrote down just a couple of things so I didn't forget while you're talking. But on our team, the agents are required to pump up the TCs before we do that handoff, right? Any handoff in any transaction, or even if it's a business transaction, not a real estate transaction, any handoff from person to person gets sticky sometimes, because you already have trust. Now you're passing me off to someone that I don't have trust with. And so having that agent pump up, oh my gosh, you wouldn't even want me involved. Like, these guys are going to do it so much better, right? These guys are incredible, blah, blah, blah. You're pumping them up. Now, the caveat to that is they have to have the trust, right? They can't just go out and say that if they don't mean it. So if they ever don't have that trust, they need to come to the leadership team, and you need to work that out, because that is a requirement for them to pump them up, because it's a much easier transition when you're passing them off to that TC. You're not necessarily passing them off, but that's the way it feels to the client a lot of the time. And so one of the other things you touched on was culture, right? It's so important to have a good culture and understand that everyone is on even playing field. Like, you couldn't do your job without this person, and this person couldn't do their job without you. And so you guys are a team, and fostering that culture as much as you can is really important. And that goes all the way down to virtual assistants. And I won't get on my soapbox because this is something I'm really passionate about, but the culture from virtual assistants to admin to agents to team leaders, I just can't stress how important it is to have all those people working together and not feeling like one's better than the other in that transaction.
Right. And I think sometimes that gets lost with, you're like, oh, well, this is my virtual assistant. And mentally, because of where we are catching up to the technology, it's like, oh, it's a bot. It's not a real person. No, it's a human being who has children to feed and, vacations that they take. It's not something you should treat just as a computer. So
and most of the time they're so loyal, right? Most of the VAs that I've ever had, they're so loyal and they're so good at their jobs. People don't realize the quality of work you can get. The problem is, and not to take this off on a tangent, right? But the training, it really comes back to your training of them. You can't just throw a US-based person in a job and expect them to know everything. Why do you do it with a VA? It makes no sense. It boggles my mind every time I hear about this. You have to have video training. You have to have in-person training. You have to treat them like a part of the team. And when you do that, you can get someone that is very loyal and very good at their job for a fraction of the cost. And you're able to scale your team much quicker than you would have been able to do it previously.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm sure that they would make great transaction coordinators as well. If you are a smaller team and you're not, able to bring someone on full time, you might be able to resource someone like that with good training to help you manage your transactions.
Yeah, for sure. We have a lot of them on our team that have been TCs in the past and have come over and now they're support reps or they're content specialists or whatever. There's a lot of positions on our team that are filled by offshore people that are just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people, and also very good at their jobs.
Yeah, good. Well, it sounds like a great place to work. So when it comes to managing and cultivating that, another piece of coaching that I would advise team leaders is coaching your closers or your transaction coordinators, whatever your position's called, on how to talk to the agents about their missing items. And I think this too can, if not handled well or not trained proactively, it can lead to more of the finger pointing, because I think the transaction coordinators sometimes aren't licensed and maybe have not experienced what it's like to be a real estate agent. So I think on the other side of that coin, just like the agent needs to understand the role and the experience of the transaction coordinator, it's also important for the transaction coordinator to have some sympathy for the agent and understand not only the experience, what they're going through, but also maybe the personality type of the agent, and knowing, like, yes, you might be able to be a little more direct with the agent than you would someone who has a more operational personality, but you still need to acknowledge that they're not going to be able to get back to you right away. They probably aren't going to have too many pleases and thank yous in their responses, and that's fine. They don't mean it disrespectfully. They're just going very, very fast. So how would you approach coaching your transaction coordinators in dealing with agents?
Yeah, I think, back in the day, we used to do the DISC test was what we did at the time. Since then, we've done way more to kind of dive into that. But at the time, you would just post them up on your door. And so people coming to your door would get that last minute reminder, oh, he doesn't, he's a high D. He's not going to want to have more than a 4-second conversation with me. So I got to parse this down to something that he's actually going to remember. And like you said, it's no disrespect, right? It's just how we are as people and how we like to be communicated with. So the more, the culture goes back to the culture, right? Of knowing your coworkers and how they like to be communicated with. And hopefully they do you the same respect to communicate the way you want to be communicated with. But just knowing that and having those expectations, it all really goes back to what kind of the whole thing of what we've been talking about is like, be a good coworker, like learn how they want to be communicated with. Like give them some grace. It's okay to give people empathy every once in a while. You don't know if their dog died this morning or their, kid's sick or whatever. You just don't know what's happening in people's lives. So the more understanding we can be on the team, and maybe even shadow them for a day and just see how many balls in the air that an agent has. Sometimes people don't realize how many balls in the air an agent has and how maddening it can be sometimes. But on the flip side, they don't realize how much detail work goes into being a TC. And so just having that perspective on both sides, I think, is just so important when you're running a team and going back to treating people equally.
Yeah, it really does help. And I think that that's something that as leaders, when we get to the point where we're in those leadership positions, those human elements are sometimes you're so worried about, well, who does what? And I want it done by this date, but really taking the time to connect them as humans and connect them regularly. Obviously you're going to have agent events and then you'll have operational events. And I'm talking to the larger teams here probably, but have blended events where they are having opportunities to get to know one another. I think that's very, very important.
I have to say, like, I was the worst at this when I first started. I thought that culture was just a bunch of crap, honestly. If I'm being totally honest, when I first started in this profession, I was like, this doesn't even matter. Let's just get the money. Let's get shit done. Let's, do our thing. And, as you mature, I guess and as you go through situations of the team and realizing that you're not being a good leader, right? And the problems that are downstream are really because of you and the way that you trained and led your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard that self-reflection is
Yeah.
really hard because you're like, oh, it is me. I'm
the problem. Yeah. But when you have that
Yeah.
perspective and when you take a step back and really look at your team and the problems that they're having, like, I guess take a look at yourself first, because a lot of those problems you could solve through training or onboarding or a multitude of systems. Like, you don't have to be the most emotional person in the world. I'm not, right? And my team knows that. But there are systems you can put in place to cultivate that and to get to know your team better, and making sure that the right training is being in place so that you don't have those downstream problems.
Right. I like that a lot. So I am a agent and I've started my own brokerage, and I'm a broker in charge. I've got my own brokerage and I need a closing department. Where do I start? I've identified the person. So I'm going to start my closing department. Where do I start in building this out?
Yeah, first of all, you need a system, right? You need a good, whether it's a software or whether it's just Google Sheets that you're going after, you just have to have a plan. Like, how are we going to process these transactions? The first thing I would say is don't bring in a brand new person, right, that knows nothing about transactions, because typically the agent starting this has been insulated from it. They've hired a TC, outsourced, or whatever, their brokerage provided one or something. They're not very versed in it. If you are, great, you're ahead of the game, but most agents aren't. And so having that person that can come in that has 3 to 5 years experience in doing this in your state, make sure you pay attention to that, in your state, in your area. That's very important. Especially when you're first starting, because they know the ins and outs, right? If you meet a good TC, they know something can just click for them, right? And they're like, oh, this transaction is not going well. Why? I don't know why. I just feel it, right? And those are the people that you want to start your business with. So 3 to 5 years experience minimum for that first hire is what I recommend. Okay. You can do it the other way, and you can train them up, but I really like to have that experienced person that can be my brainstorming person, right? And you can brainstorm ideas that, hey, I'd like to see it this way. Well, how do we get to this? And really being kind of your partner in crime, right? You need a partner in that so that you can build the department with the right systems. And it's not even the right systems, it's the right systems for you and how you want to run your business. And that's why people come to us and they're like, hey, can you just build out our whole system? And I'm like, I could, but it wouldn't reflect you at all. I need to know your personality and how you educate clients and how you deal with clients and what you want to see. What's the end goal here? Before I can put a system in place that's going to fit you and that ultimately you're going to be happy with in 3 to 5 years down the road.
Right. I love it. All right. So I've got my transaction coordinator, my closer. I've got a system that I'm working with. What does that system include? So I've got a checklist of what I do, of what the agent does, what other tools do I need to execute?
Yeah, at a minimum, right? It depends on how big you're going to scale and what system you're going to want to start with. You're not going to want to start with Google Sheets if you have your eye on doing 1,000 transactions a year in the next 2 or 3 years, right? It's not going to work. It's not going to scale well. You're going to have to switch systems. If anyone on here has ever switched a CRM, they know how maddening that can be. So you want to get the right system for you. And I'm happy. Anyone that's on this, if you want to have a 10-minute call just to kind of talk through whatever, I'm totally open to that. Email me, Andrew at Open to Close. I'm an open book. I'll tell you anything, all my mistakes, because I've made plenty. But yeah, you want to find the right system that's going to scale to the point that you want to scale to. You don't have to fall into this Facebook thing where you have to do 1,000 a year. If you're happy with 100 a year and that's what serves your family and you, then that's okay. Be happy with that 100, but pick a system that does that. And so once you pick the system, the big things that I think are very, very important that I would not sacrifice on are custom fields. Like I mentioned, custom fields are just so important because you never know what's going to happen in the future. And you want that flexibility to be able to move to a different state or just move to a different area or do a divorce and have custom fields. And you don't want some software telling you what you can have. Okay.
Right. And before you move on, I want to talk about those custom fields. So you're talking about custom fields within your CRM that you're using so that you can customize the experience of the closing coordinator and the agent to track information inside your CRM, right?
Yeah, and in your transaction software. So if they're two different things, right? If you want to use Follow Up Boss or something like that and just do all of your transactions in there, it's possible. Mm-hmm. Are you going to scale to 1,000 transactions a year in there comfortably? Not comfortably. You know, I've seen people do it, but it's 1 out of every 1,000. Really, you need a TM software that can handle that and your CRM, but they have to talk. They have to push that data back and forth if you're going to do that. But yeah, your CRM and your TC software have to integrate in some capacity.
Okay, good. All right. I didn't mean to derail you, but
no.
These are the most important things. Custom fields.
Yep. For me, I can't stand doing dates on my hand, right? If anyone's out there and they do the 5 days for inspection period, no, get rid of that garbage. There's plenty of programs out there that can auto calculate. So you put in the acceptance date, you put in the closing date, it auto populates all the other dates. If it lands on a Saturday, you know, this is a luxury, but have it roll back to Friday for an escrow officer or a lender. If I change a date, update all my other tasks and dates and calendars, and like you can get very expansive with this. That's why it's really important to pick the right software depending on your goals. So a little bit of automation, you got to have a little bit of automation. If your system doesn't have automation and now in this day and age, then they're probably behind the times and they're probably not going to get up with the times. So there has to be a little bit of that in there. You know, for me, I want the system to tell me when to do things instead of me telling it. I don't want to have to go like in the old days, right? We had a piece of paper for each transaction and we went down and then we put it on our stack if we looked at it. And then we go to the next one and we look at it and we go through 60 transactions, right? Nowadays, the way we can set it up is if I do this field, if I change this field, this happens behind the scenes. And it's alerting me when to do things instead of me having to go to each transaction every single day and waste all my time on 30 transactions that don't have anything to do at all. Now, if you're on a smaller scale, you can still run that way for sure. But custom fields, some type of automation, some type of automatic date calculation for sure. If you are going to invest in a TM software, I would get something that's more role-based. You don't want to assign John to this task and then you end up firing John because he's not a great TC. And now what do you have to do? You have to go through thousands of tasks for all these transactions you have going on, hopefully. And you have to change John to Sarah, John to Sarah, John to Sarah. You want a role-based so that all I have to do is say, Sarah's now John, and it updates the whole system with Sarah. So really important, really, really important. If you don't want headaches later, I would say. Exactly. And then something that can handle emails, not sending from SendGrid. A lot of these programs will send from like a SendGrid. You'll have no deliverability. They'll start going into spam. You need something with like a Google or Microsoft integration that Google's actually going to send it. You're going to see it in Follow Up Boss. You're going to see it in your sent folder in Google, and you're going to see it in your TM software. So something that can handle emails, contacts, documents, and tasks. Those are the 4 big ones.
Okay. And would you want something that syncs to your calendar as well? I'm thinking that too, like, would that's something else I always have to update is my calendar. If it talks directly to my calendar, then that's one less step to.
Yeah. And your storage, right? Like if you're using Drive to back up your documents, maybe you keep them in Follow Up Boss, maybe you keep them in Open to Close, maybe you keep them in Drive too, just in case. Having that automatic sync between those things is, it's not 100% necessary, but man, it saves you a lot of time and aggravation. It's really nice to have. So having those little things is going to start, you're going to start seeing a quality of life and less time spent on the transaction, where now your TC is able to do 100 transactions a month instead of 15 transactions a month. So
Right.
all these little things start building on each other.
And what would you say an experienced so I'm looking at growing my business and I want to do 1,000 transactions. How many TCs do I need?
It's going to depend on what you're requiring of them. So I think you need a really airtight job description, right? Do you have an admin and a TC, and that admin's handling the admin? Or are you making your TC be that all-in-one person on the backside of your business? It's a much different proposition. And so when I talk numbers of, people are processing 150 transactions a month or 160 transactions a month on our software, that's a dedicated TC that's all they do, right? They're not answering your emails, and they're not going to pick up your dry cleaning, because I've seen it all, going out and grabbing some lock boxes for you. Like, no, you have to have a very airtight job descriptions and know what they're doing. And then you can determine how many is reasonable for them. But I would say that, I'd say the industry standard for a TC is probably 20 a month. I think with a really good software, though, you can get over 100 a month with that same person. It's just you're taking all that minutia off their plate, all those repetitive tasks, all that double typing. You're taking all that away so they can actually just focus on what they're really good at.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about when we shifted to be a paperless workplace, like that. And pro tip, if you aren't paperless, get there, because it's possible and it will save you. But that, that shift, because everyone had been doing it so long, it took a hair longer than we really wanted it to. Cause I was like, well, we'll get you these devices and there'll be new fun toys. And they were like, clinging to their paper, and that's fine. Change, everyone experiences change, and that's your day, that's your work day if you're used to printing things out and writing things on a list. So figuring out the technical language of your TCs, do they really like writing on things? Get them a device where you can write on it and hit send and it goes to the cloud. But yeah, moving to paperless too will also help you if you're not there yet.
Definitely some challenges there. Obviously, if you're used to that, there's a lot of resistance just because of unfamiliarity with what the new process is. So having some empathy for your staff too when you're implementing, a lot of us leaders, right? They'll go to these conferences, get all these great ideas. And then we come back and we just shit all over our staff and then expect them to just pick up the pieces as we go out and sell houses. And so having a little bit more thoughtful method, if you go to a conference, pick one thing and, put some others on a backlog. You can always get to them, but pick one thing, come in, give your staff some time to get used to this thing and make sure that it's actually going to work, because this great idea for this team doing 50 transactions may not work for a team doing 2,000 transactions. And so just making sure there's some testing set in there and getting feedback from the people that are actually doing it, not the team leader that's not even involved in the transaction.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to recap just a little bit. We've covered a lot of ground here. So establishing clear lines of who's doing what, having a method to communicate behind the scenes to reduce the back and forth, to make it more efficient for both your TC and your agent, but also to help cultivate a seamless experience for your client is very, very important. Managing your expectations, not only from your client, but your agent and your transaction coordinator. Cultivating a culture of teamwork between your operations staff, your transaction coordinator, and your agent is really great. and making sure you're automating and you're using the tools available to you, whether it's free tools like a Google Sheet, or you're investing in some software or someone to help you, like an open to close. Having those things available are going to help you to make this not only a better experience for your agents so they stay with you longer, but it's going to help your clients have a better experience so they will want to do more transactions with you and spread the word about how wonderful it is to do business with you. And you can create a really great position for someone as a TC. Andrew, do you have any parting thoughts for us about?
I would say, just to add to that, one thing that we didn't talk about a ton was getting the buy-in from everyone, setting the expectations, having the meeting, but getting a verbal buy-in from them. Yes.
Like
and even record the meeting, even set up an old, set up a phone in the corner and record the meeting. Like, that buy-in is so important to go back and review afterwards. Well, why'd you tell me this was okay? If it's not okay with you, let's talk about it further. Let's get to the root of the issue here. But no, that's the only thing I wanted to add, because that buy-in is so important. If you don't get the buy-in, then they're just seeing you as a leader that's forcing them to do something that they don't want. You have to be open to those discussions, and you have to be open to knowing that you don't know everything, and you may get the greatest suggestion from the guy that's emptying the garbage cans versus the guy that's been in the industry for 40 years, because he sees it in a different light. So I think just being open to that will open up a lot of possibilities in your business.
It's so true. There's been so many times you talk about, like, the way you initially react to something, that's the old you. The way you, after a minute and you've collected yourself and you really move forward, that's the new you. And in so many situations, I've been in boardrooms or whatever, and something's said where internally I'm like, I hate that. That's the worst idea ever. And that flashes through my mind, but I take a deep breath and I said, well, can you tell me more about that? And every single time after I get their point of view that I've never even considered before, a piece of information that it always changes my mind. And I'm like, okay, I can see what you're talking about now. But just talking about things like that amongst your team and having those lines of communication open where it's safe, if you will, to express something that might be a little controversial, and having that environment where someone can say what's on their mind and not be attacked, if you will, over it, or shushed, or we dismissed. That's the word I'm looking for, or any of those words, because I've been in boardrooms where that's happened too. But that human element is just super important to not only the agent closing coordinator position relationship, but for your team as a whole. It needs to be considered, I think, a lot more often than we realize.
Yeah, I like the word safe, right? You have to empower your employees to be able to have opinions, and sometimes you're not going to, they can talk till they're blue in the face. They're just not great suggestions, right? There's going to be those. You have them too. But
I have a lot of really bad ideas, master CEO.
but you got to be open to them, right? You got to be open to listening to people and be able to have a heated conversation and not take it personally. At the end of the conversation, you decide what the best way to go is, and you're friends again. It doesn't mean that you hate the person just because they don't agree with you. I think the world we're living in nowadays, there's a lot of that where you don't have my opinion, then I don't like you. I think there's a lot of flexibility we could have and empathy we could have with people to make it a better process.
Yeah, I definitely agree. All right. That's all the questions that I have for you. I want to thank you so much for your time today and your insight. And I think, as we delve into the operational side and getting into the exact closing process, I mean, this isn't sexy stuff, but it's really, really, really important. And it's important to get it right. And it's important to roll it out with your company in a very thoughtful way, because that's what's going to help you grow. So
it can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, we have clients that are doing a lot of transactions that we've saved hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars by streamlining their processes and getting their systems in place. And for anyone on this call, I forgot to mention, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at Andrew at Open Close. I think Lee dropped my email in there just so you had it. We'll also, we do a 15 transaction trial. So if you do want to do a trial on Open to Close, we don't do time-based. We don't believe in charging you for 2 systems while you're setting up. So while you're setting up, it's completely free. You have all the time in the world. You could take a year if you want to. I don't really advise a year, but if you want to take a year, you could. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Help at Open to Close is our implementation team, and we're happy to answer any questions, even if you're not going with us, right? If you just have questions about how do I get started or what program would be good for me now, we're not a hard sell organization. Believe me, we're going to give you the best advice for you at this stage in the game. And so you can get started right, because we want people to be successful. And eventually, we hope you think of us.
I love it. And we talked a lot about custom fields with the recording that I'll be sending out tomorrow morning. I'll include our training videos on custom fields and how to use them. So thank you everybody for being here. A special thank you to Andrew and Open to Close. And we are Amplified Solutions. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.